September 12, 2003. The autumn air in Traverse City, Michigan, carried the sharp scent of pine and damp earth as yellow school buses lined up outside Traverse Heights Elementary School. Parents kissed their children goodbye, cameras flashed, and excited chatter filled the parking lot. It was the day of the annual 5th grade camping trip to Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, a tradition that had run for over 20 years without incident. Diane Hayes adjusted her daughter's backpack straps for the third time that morning, her hands trembling slightly. Emma, 9 years old with wild auburn curls and freckles scattered across her nose like constellations, rolled her eyes in that particular way only children on the verge of independence could manage. "Mom, I'm fine. You're embarrassing me," Emma whispered, glancing at her classmates who were already boarding the bus. Diane crouched down to meet her daughter's green eyes, the same shade as her own. "I know, sweetheart. I want you to have the best time. And remember, if anything feels wrong, I'll tell Mrs. Patterson." "I know, Mom. You've told me like 100 times." Emma's smile was radiant, uncomplicated by the weight of the world that adults carried. She hugged her mother tightly, her small arms surprisingly strong. "I love you. I'll see you Sunday night." "I love you more than all the stars," Diane replied, their ritual phrase since Emma was old enough to speak. As Emma bounded toward the bus, her purple jacket catching the morning light, Diane felt an inexplicable tightness in her chest. She told herself it was normal. Every parent felt this way when their child left for the first time. She waved as the bus pulled away, Emma's face pressed against the window, hand raised high. Diane didn't know that would be the last time she'd see her daughter's genuine smile for 16 years. The camping site was pristine that Friday afternoon. Counselor Patricia Patterson, a veteran teacher with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for organization, assigned the children to their groups. Emma was placed in cabin 7 with 5 other girls: Madison, Sophie, Ashley, Claire, and Jasmine. The girls squealed with delight, dropping their bags on the wooden bunks and immediately beginning to arrange their territories. "I call top bunk," Emma announced, climbing the ladder with the agility of someone who'd spent countless summers climbing trees in her backyard. The afternoon passed in a blur of activities. They hiked through the forest, identifying different tree species with their nature guide, a young man named Derek Mills who worked for the Park Service. They roasted marshmallows as the sun dipped below Lake Michigan's horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. Emma's laughter echoed through the trees as she told ghost stories, deliberately silly ones that made her friends giggle rather than frightened. Patricia Patterson watched her students with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding perfectly according to schedule. The parent volunteers, including Richard Thornton, a respected local dentist, and Carol Brennan, who worked at the county clerk's office, helped serve dinner and ensured the perimeter was secure. At 9:30 p.m., lights out was called. The girls settled into their sleeping bags, whispers and giggles gradually fading into silence. Patricia did her rounds, flashlight in hand, checking each cabin. Everything appeared normal. The forest was quiet except for the occasional hoot of an owl and the distant lapping of lake water against the shore. At 6:47 a.m. on September 13th, Madison's scream shattered the morning peace. "She's gone. Emma's not in her bed." Patricia rushed to cabin 7, her heart hammering against her ribs. Emma's sleeping bag lay empty, still slightly warm. Her backpack was gone, but her jacket, the purple one Diane had made sure was zipped up properly, hung on a hook by the door. Her shoes were missing. "Did anyone hear anything?" Patricia demanded, her voice sharp with rising panic. The girls shook their heads, eyes wide with fear and confusion. Sophie started crying. "We thought she went to the bathroom," Ashley offered weakly. Within minutes, the entire camp was awake. Derek Mills and the parent volunteers fanned out, calling Emma's name. The protocol was immediately activated. Counselors searched the immediate area while Richard Thornton used his cell phone to call 911. The signal was weak, cutting in and out, but he finally got through. "We have a missing child. Emma Hayes, 9 years old, auburn hair, green eyes, last seen wearing pink pajamas. We're at Sleeping Bear Dunes Campground, Site C7. The Michigan State Police arrived within an hour, followed by the Grand Traverse County Sheriff's Department. Detective Frank Morrison, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s with weathered features and knowing eyes, took command of the scene. He'd worked missing persons cases before, but something about this one felt different from the start. Call it instinct or years of experience reading crime scenes. "Seal the area. Nobody leaves until we've taken statements," Morrison ordered. "And someone get the parents here now." Diane Hayes received the phone call at 8:15 a.m. She'd been in her kitchen preparing Emma's favorite welcome home meal, chicken parmesan, when her phone rang. The moment she heard Patricia Patterson's voice cracking with emotion, her world tilted sideways. "Diane, there's been. Emma is. We can't find her. The police are here. You need to come right away." The 60-mile drive to the campground passed in a haze. Diane's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her mind raced through possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Emma had wandered off. Emma had gotten lost chasing an animal. Emma had fallen and hurt herself. Emma was playing a prank. Emma was... No, she couldn't think that. Wouldn't think that. When she arrived, the campground looked like a war zone. Police vehicles, K-9 units, volunteers from the community already forming search parties. Diane stumbled out of her car and was immediately intercepted by Detective Morrison. "Mrs. Hayes, I'm Detective Frank Morrison. I need you to stay calm and answer some questions for me. Where's my daughter?" Diane's voice was barely above a whisper. "That's what we're working to find out. When was the last time you spoke with Emma?" "Yesterday morning, when she got on the bus. She was fine. She was happy. She was excited." The words tumbled out in a rush. "You have to find her. She's just a little girl. She doesn't know these woods. What if she's hurt? What if..." "We have teams searching every inch of this area," Morrison assured her, though his expression remained grave. "Is there anything unusual that happened recently? Anyone who showed inappropriate interest in Emma? Any changes in her behavior?" Diane shook her head frantically. "No, nothing. Emma's a normal kid. She likes school, she has friends, she plays soccer. There's nothing unusual. You don't understand. Emma wouldn't just wander off. She's smart. She knows better." That was the detail that bothered Morrison most. The children all reported that Emma was asleep when they dozed off. The counselors had checked every cabin at 9:30 p.m. and again at midnight. The area was surrounded by dense forest, difficult terrain for a 9-year-old to navigate in the dark. And yet, there were no signs of struggle in the cabin, no evidence of forced entry. It was as if Emma Hayes had simply vanished into thin air. By nightfall on September 13th, over 200 volunteers were combing through the forest. Search dogs followed scent trails that led nowhere, circling back on themselves or stopping abruptly at the main road. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras swept overhead, finding nothing. The temperature dropped to 42 degrees, cold enough to be dangerous for a child in pajamas. Diane refused to leave the command post. She stood by the maps, watching officers mark off searched areas with red X's, each one representing another section where her daughter wasn't found. Other parents had come to offer support, bringing coffee and blankets, but their sympathy felt suffocating. Patricia Patterson approached Diane tentatively, her eyes red from crying. "Diane, I am so sorry. I don't know how this happened. I checked the cabin. I did everything right. I don't understand." "Then help me understand," Diane interrupted, her voice cold and sharp as broken glass. "Explain to me how my daughter disappeared from a supervised campground with counselors and parent volunteers everywhere. Explain how nobody saw anything, heard anything, make it make sense." Patricia had no answers. None of them did. As the investigation intensified, Detective Morrison began interviewing everyone present at the campground. Richard Thornton, the dentist who'd volunteered, had an alibi. He'd been in his cabin with 3 other fathers all night. Carol Brennan had slept in the counselor's cabin with Patricia. Derek Mills, the nature guide, had been in the staff quarters and had witnesses to confirm it. Every single adult had an accounting of their whereabouts, except the stories didn't quite match up. Small inconsistencies, tiny gaps in timelines. Morrison made careful notes, his instincts telling him that something was fundamentally wrong with this picture, but he couldn't identify what. On September 15th, 72 hours after Emma's disappearance, the search was officially classified as a potential abduction. The FBI was called in. Amber alerts flashed across television screens throughout Michigan and neighboring states. Emma's school photo, her bright smile, her freckles, her innocent eyes, became ubiquitous. Diane Hayes stood before news cameras, her face a mask of controlled desperation. "Please, if you have my daughter, bring her home. She's just a baby. She needs her family. Emma, if you can hear this, Mommy loves you. I'm coming for you. I will never stop looking." But as days turned to weeks, and weeks turned to months, the search efforts dwindled. Leads evaporated. Tips led nowhere. The case grew cold despite Diane's protests, despite her continued advocacy, despite her refusal to accept that Emma was gone forever. What none of them knew, what wouldn't be discovered for 16 agonizing years, was that Emma Hayes hadn't wandered into the forest at all. She'd been taken, and the people responsible weren't strangers lurking in the shadows. They were hiding in plain sight. The investigation into Emma Hayes' disappearance consumed Traverse City for months. Detective Frank Morrison worked the case obsessively, sleeping at his desk more nights than he went home. He interviewed hundreds of people, followed countless leads, and pursued every theory, no matter how implausible. But by March 2004, 6 months after Emma vanished, the trail had gone completely cold. The official theory, reluctantly adopted by the Michigan State Police, was that Emma had somehow left the cabin during the night, perhaps sleepwalking or needing the bathroom, and had become disoriented in the dark forest. Despite the lack of a body, despite the absence of any physical evidence, the consensus became that Emma Hayes had died of exposure in those woods, and the forest had simply claimed her remains. Diane Hayes rejected this conclusion with every fiber of her being. "My daughter is alive," she told Morrison during one of their many meetings in early 2004. Her eyes were hollow from sleepless nights, her frame noticeably thinner, but her conviction remained unshakable. "I can feel it. A mother knows. Emma is out there, and she's waiting for me to find her." Morrison wanted to believe her. God, how he wanted to. But the statistics were brutal and unforgiving. After 6 months with no ransom demand, no sightings, no evidence of life, the odds of finding a missing child alive dropped to nearly zero. He'd seen it too many times before. Hope was a luxury that reality rarely accommodated. "Mrs. Hayes, I understand this is impossible to accept, but we've exhausted every avenue. We've searched thousands of square miles. We've investigated every person who was at that campground. We've followed up on over 3,000 tips. There's nothing left to pursue." "Then pursue them again," Diane said, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Check alibis again. Re-interview witnesses. Someone is lying. Someone knows something. My daughter didn't just evaporate, but the department had other cases, other missing persons, other crimes demanding attention and resources." By summer 2004, the Emma Hayes case was officially designated as cold, a file stored in a cabinet, a name in a database, a tragedy that the community slowly, reluctantly, began to move past. Diane refused to move past anything. She quit her job as a nurse at Munson Medical Center to dedicate herself entirely to finding Emma. She mortgaged her house to fund private investigators. She created missing persons posters that she personally distributed to every truck stop, gas station, and rest area within a 500-mile radius. She maintained a website, FindEmmaHayes.com, that she updated daily with new information, theories, and pleas for help. Her family worried she was having a breakdown. Her sister Rebecca flew in from Chicago in October 2004 and found Diane living in what could only be described as a command center. Every wall of her modest 2-bedroom house was covered with maps, photographs, timelines, and documents. String connected different points, creating a web of possible connections that only made sense to Diane. "Dee, you need to take care of yourself," Rebecca said gently, removing a cold cup of coffee from Diane's hand and replacing it with a glass of water. "When was the last time you ate? When did you last sleep? How can I sleep when Emma might be scared? When she might be calling for me?" Diane's eyes were wild, desperate. "Everyone's given up on her. Everyone except me. I'm all she has left. You can't help Emma if you destroy yourself." But Diane was beyond reason. She attended support groups for families of missing children, where she met others trapped in the same nightmare. Parents who'd lost sons and daughters to unknown fates, suspended in an agonizing limbo between hope and grief. Some found solace in acceptance. Diane found only fuel for her determination. The years passed with cruel steadiness. 2005, 2006, 2007. Each year on September 12th, Diane held a vigil at the campground where Emma disappeared. The first year, hundreds attended. By the 5th year, only a handful of dedicated supporters showed up, mostly other parents of missing children who understood that time didn't heal this particular wound. Detective Morrison, now promoted to sergeant, still checked in on Diane periodically. He'd never been able to shake the case completely. Something about Emma Hayes' disappearance had always bothered him. The lack of evidence, the too perfect alibis, the way everyone's stories aligned just a little too neatly. But without new evidence, his hands were tied. "Mrs. Hayes, I haven't forgotten Emma," he told her during a visit in 2008. If anything breaks, if we get any new information, I'll pursue it. You have my word." Diane nodded, not really hearing him anymore. She'd heard promises before. Words were cheap. Action was what mattered. In 2010, Diane did something that shocked her remaining friends and family. She enrolled in online courses to become a licensed private investigator herself. If the system wouldn't find her daughter, she'd acquire the tools and knowledge to do it herself. She studied criminal justice, forensic science, investigative techniques. She learned how to access public records, how to conduct surveillance, how to interview witnesses effectively. By 2012, she'd earned her license and was taking on small cases to fund her ongoing search for Emma. She specialized in finding people, missing persons, deadbeat parents, witnesses who'd disappeared. She was good at it too. Obsessively good. Because every person she found was practice for the day she'd find Emma. The community's opinion of Diane had shifted over the years. Some admired her dedication, calling her a hero, a mother who never gave up. Others whispered that she'd lost her grip on reality, that her obsession was unhealthy, that she needed psychiatric help. Diane didn't care what they thought. Let them whisper. Let them judge. None of them had lost a child. In 2015, 12 years after Emma's disappearance, Diane received a letter. No return address, postmarked from Detroit. Inside was a single sentence written in block letters. "Some secrets are buried in plain sight." Diane's hands shook as she read it. She immediately contacted Morrison, now a lieutenant in the county sheriff's department. He had the letter analyzed. No fingerprints, generic paper available at any office supply store. The postmark offered no useful leads. The handwriting analysis was inconclusive. "It could be a crank," Morrison cautioned. "We get these periodically on high-profile cases. Someone who wants attention or thinks they're being helpful. Or it could be someone who knows something," Diane countered. "After 12 years of silence, why send this now? Why these specific words?" She hung the letter on her wall of evidence, studying it obsessively. Plain sight suggested that whatever happened to Emma, the answer was visible, obvious, hiding among things people saw every day without really looking. But what did that mean? A person? A place? A piece of evidence overlooked? Diane returned to her files, reviewing everything again with fresh eyes. The campground staff, the parent volunteers, the other children, the initial investigation reports. She'd read them hundreds of times before, but now she looked for what might be hiding in plain sight. Richard Thornton, the dentist who'd volunteered that night, had moved away in 2006, relocated to Arizona for health reasons. Carol Brennan still worked at the county clerk's office, had never married, kept to herself. Patricia Patterson had retired from teaching in 2010, the guilt and trauma of losing a student under her supervision having broken something in her. Derek Mills, the young nature guide, had left the Park Service and now worked in construction. Diane created dossiers on each of them, tracking their lives over the intervening years. On the surface, they all appeared to be normal people living normal lives. But Diane had learned that monsters rarely looked like monsters. They looked like dentists and clerks and teachers. They smiled and waved and hid their darkness behind respectability. In 2016, Diane did something that could have gotten her arrested. She broke into Richard Thornton's former dental office, which had been vacant since he'd sold his practice. She didn't know what she was looking for, just that her instincts were screaming that she'd missed something crucial. The office was dusty, abandoned, but still contained filing cabinets full of old patient records. Diane spent hours searching by flashlight, not even sure what would constitute evidence. Then, in a box marked Donations Community Events, she found photographs from various charitable functions Thornton had participated in, school events, Little League sponsorships, community fundraisers. He was in dozens of photos with children, always smiling, always positioned close to them, his hand on a shoulder here, an arm around a waist there. Individual moments that could be innocent, but together, they formed a pattern. Diane's stomach turned. She photographed everything with her phone, then carefully returned the items exactly as she'd found them. She couldn't use this evidence officially. It was obtained illegally, but it confirmed what her gut had been telling her for years. Something was very wrong with Richard Thornton. She hired a private investigator in Arizona to conduct surveillance on Thornton. The reports came back unremarkable. He lived alone, worked part-time at a community health clinic, kept a low profile. But there was one detail that caught Diane's attention. Thornton owned a second property in northern Arizona, a remote cabin that he visited monthly. Why would a single man need two properties? What was at that cabin? Before Diane could pursue this lead further, something unexpected happened. In March 2017, Derek Mills, the former nature guide, committed suicide. He hanged himself in his apartment, leaving no note. The death was ruled straightforward by investigators, attributed to depression and financial troubles. But Diane didn't believe in coincidences. She attended Mills's memorial service, watching from a distance, noting who came and how they behaved. Carol Brennan was there, stone-faced and silent. So was Patricia Patterson, who wept quietly. They spoke briefly after the service, their body language suggesting familiarity beyond mere acquaintances from a shared tragedy 14 years prior. Diane followed Carol Brennan home that day, maintaining careful distance. She watched as Patricia Patterson's car pulled up to Carol's house an hour later. The two women went inside. Diane waited, camera ready. They emerged 3 hours later, both looking shaken. Something was happening. The death of Derek Mills had disturbed them. Why? What connected these people beyond the camping trip? Diane intensified her investigation, pulling at threads that others would have considered irrelevant. She discovered that Carol Brennan and Richard Thornton had known each other before the camping trip. They'd both served on the board of a local youth center in the late 1990s. She found that Patricia Patterson's husband had died in 2001, and Richard Thornton had handled the estate planning. These people were connected, not just by Emma's disappearance, but by relationships that predated it. Relationships that had been conveniently omitted from their initial statements to police. In September 2018, 15 years after Emma vanished, Diane did something desperate. She created a fake social media profile and reached out to Patricia Patterson, pretending to be a journalist writing a retrospective piece on unsolved missing persons cases. Patricia agreed to meet. They sat in a coffee shop in downtown Traverse City, Patricia looking much older than her 63 years, worn down by guilt and secrets. Diane, using her alias, asked gentle questions about the camping trip, about how it felt to be the counselor in charge when a child disappeared. "It destroyed me," Patricia said quietly, staring into her coffee. "I've replayed that night thousands of times. What I could have done differently, what I missed." "Did you miss something?" Diane asked carefully. Patricia's hands trembled. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, "We all missed something. Or maybe we saw it and convinced ourselves it was nothing. I don't know anymore. I can't tell the difference between memory and guilt." "What do you mean? What did you see?" But Patricia shut down, shaking her head. "I shouldn't have agreed to this. I can't talk about it. I'm sorry." She stood abruptly and left, coffee untouched. Diane sat there, heart pounding. Patricia knew something. They all knew something. And whatever it was eating them alive. On January 8, 2019, Diane received a phone call that would change everything. The voice was distorted, clearly using some kind of electronic modulator. "Stop digging into the past, Mrs. Hayes. Some stones are better left unturned." "Who is this?" Diane demanded. "Do you know where Emma is?" The line went dead. Diane immediately called Morrison, now a captain in the sheriff's department. The call was traced to a burner phone activated in Detroit, used once then destroyed. But the message confirmed what Diane had believed all along. Emma's disappearance wasn't a random tragedy. It was a crime, and the people responsible were still out there, still watching, still hiding in plain sight. February 2019 brought a winter storm that buried northern Michigan under 2 feet of snow. Traverse City became a ghost town of white. Businesses closed, roads impassable. Diane Hayes sat in her cluttered living room, surrounded by 16 years of accumulated evidence, staring at her wall of connections until her eyes burned. The threatening phone call from January had only strengthened her resolve. Someone was scared. Someone felt exposed. That meant she was close. Closer than she'd ever been. But close to what? The answer felt like it was dancing just beyond her peripheral vision. Visible, but not quite graspable. Captain Frank Morrison had assigned a patrol car to periodically check on Diane's house after the threatening call. He didn't say it explicitly, but she understood. He was worried about her safety. After all these years, he still cared. That meant something. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, cruelly ironic, Diane received a package. No return address, postmarked from Lansing. Inside was a USB drive and a note written in the same block letters as the 2015 letter. "You were right about Thornton. Check the property records. The cabin isn't in his name." Diane's hands shook as she inserted the USB drive into her laptop. It contained scanned documents. Property records for a cabin in northern Michigan, just outside a town called Lewiston. The property was registered to a shell company, Northern Pines Holdings, LLC. The company had been established in 2002, 1 year before Emma's disappearance. Diane spent the next week tracing the ownership. Northern Pines Holdings had 3 board members listed in the original incorporation documents: R. Thornton, C. Brennan, and P. Mills. Richard Thornton, Carol Brennan, and Peter Mills, Derek Mills' father, who had died in 2010. 3 people who had all been at the campground the night Emma disappeared. 3 people who owned property together but had never disclosed this connection to investigators. Diane's heart raced. This was it. This was the thread that would unravel everything. She immediately drove to Morrison's office, bursting through his door without knocking. "I found it. I found the connection. I found the E." Morrison looked up from his paperwork, concern flashing across his weathered face. "Diane, you need to calm down. What connection?" She spread the documents across his desk, explaining rapidly about the shell company, the cabin, the shared ownership that had been deliberately concealed from the investigation. Morrison studied the papers, his expression growing darker with each page. "Why didn't this come up in 2003? He muttered, more to himself than to Diane. "We did background checks on everyone. Financial records. Property ownership should have flagged this. Because nobody was looking for a connection between them," Diane said. "They weren't suspects. They were witnesses, helpers, respectable community members. The investigation focused outward, on strangers, predators, outsiders. But what if the threat wasn't outside? What if it was right there in the camp?" Morrison reached for his phone. "I'm calling the FBI. If what you're suggesting is true, if these people were somehow involved in Emma's abduction, we need federal resources. This is conspiracy. Kidnapping across state lines, potentially. This is bigger than my department." "No." Diane's voice was sharp, commanding. "Not yet. If you bring in the FBI now with just this, they'll spook everyone. These people have kept silent for 16 years. They'll lawyer up, destroy evidence, coordinate stories. We need more before we move." Morrison hesitated. Procedurally, he should report this immediately. But Diane had a point. And after 16 years of watching her suffer, of knowing in his gut that something about this case had never added up, he wanted to give her this chance. 48 hours, he said. "You get 48 hours to gather more evidence. But Diane, you do not, and I cannot stress this enough, you do not approach that cabin alone. You don't confront these people. You bring me what you find, and we do this by the book. Agreed?" Diane nodded, though they both knew she'd do whatever necessary to find Emma. She spent the next 2 days conducting the most intensive investigation of her life. She pulled every available record on Northern Pines Holdings. The company paid minimal property taxes on the Lewiston cabin, had no other assets, no business operations. It was a shell designed for a single purpose: to own that one piece of property while obscuring the true owner's identities. She found the original deed transfer. The property had been purchased in April 2002 for $47,000 cash. No mortgage. No paper trail beyond the initial transaction. The cabin was listed as 200 square feet, 2 bedrooms, built in 1987, on 10 acres of forested land. Remote, isolated, perfect for hiding something, or someone. Diane cross-referenced utility records. The cabin had electricity and well water but no internet or phone service. Electric usage showed consistent monthly consumption, not the pattern of a vacation property used occasionally, but of a residence occupied year-round. Someone was living there. Someone had been living there for years. On February 16th, Diane made a decision that Morrison would have forbidden if he'd known. She drove to Lewiston, a 3-hour journey through rural Michigan, small towns connected by endless stretches of snow-covered forest. She wasn't going to approach the cabin, she told herself. Just reconnaissance, just to see what was there. The property was exactly as remote as the record suggested. Down a poorly maintained dirt road, no neighbors within a mile in any direction. The cabin itself was set back from the road, partially obscured by pine trees. Smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was definitely there. Diane parked her car half a mile away and approached on foot through the woods, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She had no weapon, no backup, no real plan beyond getting close enough to see inside. Through the trees, she could make out the cabin more clearly. It looked well maintained despite its age. There was a newer model truck parked outside. She photographed the license plate. Security cameras were mounted at the corners of the building. unexpected and sophisticated for such a rural property. As she watched from behind a thick pine trunk, the cabin's front door opened. A man emerged. Late 60s, gray hair, heavy winter coat. He walked to the truck, retrieved several grocery bags, and returned inside. The entire process took less than 2 minutes, but it was enough. Diane had seen his face clearly. It wasn't Richard Thornton. It wasn't anyone she recognized. But whoever he was living in a cabin owned by 3 people connected to Emma's disappearance, and he was going to considerable lengths to remain isolated and unobserved. She photographed everything she could: the cabin's exterior, the truck, the security cameras, the surrounding area. Then she retreated carefully through the woods, her mind racing with possibilities. Who was this man? Was he working with Thornton and Brennan? Was he a caretaker? Or was he something else entirely? Back in her car, Diane ran the truck's license plate through a database she had access to through her private investigator credentials. It came back registered to Martin Keller, age 67, address listed as a P.O. box in Lewiston. She ran his name through every database she could access. Martin Keller had virtually no digital footprint, no social media, no criminal record, no marriage or divorce records, no professional licenses. He existed on paper, but barely. For a man in his 60s, that was unusual. Most people his age left trails: employment records, property ownership, credit histories. Keller had almost nothing. That suggested someone who deliberately erased or hidden his past, someone with practice at being invisible. Diane was compiling her findings to present to Morrison when her phone rang at 11:47 p.m. that night. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Mrs. Hayes?" The voice was elderly, female, wavering with emotion and fear. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Grace Mills. I was Derek's mother, Peter's wife." A long pause, then. "I need to talk to you. I have information about your daughter, but we can't do this over the phone. Can you meet me?" Diane's blood turned to ice. "Where? When?" "Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. There's a diner off Highway 72, just outside Grayling. Maggie's place. I'll be in the back booth. Come alone, Mrs. Hayes. If anyone follows you, I'll leave and you'll never hear from me again. How do I know this isn't a trap? How do I know you really know something?" Grace Mills's voice broke. "Because my husband helped take your daughter, and I've lived with that sin for 16 years. Derek couldn't live with it either. It's why he killed himself. I'm dying of cancer, Mrs. Hayes. I have maybe 3 months left. I won't meet my maker with this on my soul. I'm going to tell you everything, but you have to come alone." The line went dead. Diane sat frozen, the phone still pressed to her ear. Every instinct screamed that this could be dangerous, that she should call Morrison immediately, that walking into this meeting alone was reckless. But Grace Mills had said the words Diane had waited 16 years to hear. "I'm going to tell you everything." She would have walked through fire for that. The next morning, February 17, 2019, Diane drove to Grayling without telling anyone where she was going. She left a sealed envelope on her kitchen table addressed to Morrison. If something happened to her, he'd find it and know where to look. Maggie's place was a typical highway diner, chrome and vinyl booths, the smell of coffee and bacon grease. Grace Mills sat in the back corner booth as promised. A small woman in her 70s, bald from chemotherapy, her skin gray and paper thin. She looked like death waiting to arrive. Diane slid into the booth across from her, her entire body taut with tension. "Tell me." Grace's hands trembled as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. "My husband Peter and Richard Thornton met in 1998. They were both involved in a youth mentorship program, big brothers, big sisters. That's where it started. They found they had similar interests that weren't legal or moral." Diane felt her stomach turn. "They were pedophiles." Grace nodded, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Peter hid it from me for years. I didn't know. I swear on my life I didn't know until it was too late. They formed a group. Not large, maybe 6 or 7 men total. They shared materials, fantasies. They enabled each other. Carol Brennan knew about it. She helped them cover their tracks, falsifying records at the clerk's office, making sure certain documents disappeared. And Emma? Diane's voice was barely a whisper. "Richard Thornton had been watching your daughter. He'd seen her at community events, dental appointments. He became obsessed. He planned the camping trip specifically as an opportunity. Carol made sure the records were arranged so he'd be chosen as a parent volunteer. Patricia Patterson was supposed to be the counselor. They'd worked with her before, convinced her they were just concerned citizens who wanted to help supervise. She didn't know what they were planning, but Derek did. Your son knew? Grace's face crumpled. Derek was supposed to help drug the other counselors' coffee that night. Something mild, just enough to make them sleep deeply. He was young, stupid, they'd manipulated him. He thought they were just playing a prank. He didn't understand what they were really doing until it was too late. When Emma disappeared and he realized what had actually happened, he wanted to go to police. Peter threatened him, said if Derek talked, he'd claim Derek was the one who'd taken her. Derek was terrified. He kept silent, and it destroyed him from the inside. That's why he killed himself. Diane's hands clenched into fists. Where did they take her? Where is Emma? The cabin in Lewiston. That's where they took her that night. Richard drove her there while everyone was searching the woods. Martin Keller has been living there ever since. Keeping her. Keeping her? You mean Emma's been there for 16 years? She's alive? Grace nodded. As far as I know, yes. Martin is Richard's brother. He's the one who stayed with her. Richard visits regularly. I don't know all the details. Peter never told me everything. But Emma is there. I'm certain of it. Diane's entire world tilted. Emma was alive. After 16 years of not knowing, of fearing the worst, of being told to give up hope, Emma was alive. I need proof, Diane said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. I need something that will make the police move immediately. Grace reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out a flash drive. This contains files from Peter's computer, ones I found after he died. I was too afraid to turn them in at the time. Afraid of the shame, afraid of what people would think. But I'm dying now. Shame doesn't matter anymore. Justice matters. Your daughter matters. Diane took the flash drive with reverent care. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Emma has been suffering for 16 years. I know. Grace's voice broke. I know, and I'll burn in hell for my cowardice. I was weak, I was scared. I told myself I didn't know for sure, that maybe Peter lied to me, that maybe I misunderstood. I convinced myself of 1,000 lies so I wouldn't have to face the truth. But I can't hide anymore. I'm dying, Mrs. Hayes. I can't face my judgment with this on my conscience. Diane wanted to rage at this woman, to scream at her for the 16 years of agony her silence had caused. But looking at Grace Mills, ravaged by cancer and guilt, she saw someone who'd already been destroyed by her own choices. If this information leads to Emma, if she's brought home safely, then you've finally done the right thing, Diane said. It doesn't erase the past, but it stops the future from being the same. Grace nodded, tears falling into her cold coffee. There's one more thing. Richard Thornton knows you've been investigating. He's planning to move Emma, soon, maybe within days. If you're going to act, it has to be now. Diane stood, clutching the flash drive. Thank you. Despite everything, thank you. She walked out of that diner and directly to her car, hands shaking so badly she could barely start the engine. She drove straight to the sheriff's department, walked past the receptionist, and burst into Morrison's office. I know where Emma is, and we need to move right now. Captain Frank Morrison stared at the flash drive in Diane's trembling hand, then at her face, wild with hope and terror and 16 years of accumulated anguish. His office suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Start from the beginning, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Tell me everything. And Diane, I mean everything, including anything you did that might compromise this case in court. Diane told him about Grace Mills, the confession, the cabin, Martin Keller. She told him about her surveillance of the property, about the shell company, about the conspiracy that had hidden in plain sight for nearly 2 decades. Morrison listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with each revelation. When she finished, he immediately called FBI Special Agent Victoria Chen, who'd worked missing persons cases in the region for over a decade. Within an hour, Chen was in Morrison's office with 2 other agents, all of them crowded around a laptop as they examined the contents of Grace Mills's flash drive. The files were damning. Communications between Peter Mills and Richard Thornton discussing acquisitions, their coded term for identifying and targeting children. Financial records showing payments to Martin Keller, $2,000 monthly for 16 years paid through the shell company. And photographs, dozens of them, time-stamped over the years, showing the interior of a cabin and a girl growing from child to young woman. Emma Hayes, alive, captive, aging in photographs like a grotesque time-lapse of stolen years. Agent Chen's face remained professionally neutral, but her hands clenched into fists as she scrolled through the evidence. This is enough for warrants. Multiple warrants. We can have tactical teams ready to move within hours. No. Morrison's voice was sharp. Grace Mills said Thornton is planning to move Emma soon, maybe days. We don't have time for hours. We need to move now before they realize we're coming. Captain, I understand the urgency, but we need to do this correctly, Chen countered. If we rush in without proper preparation, we could spook them. They could harm Emma, destroy evidence, or flee. We need surveillance, we need blueprints of the cabin. We need to know exactly who's inside and what weapons they might have. Diane, who'd been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. I know the layout. I saw the cabin 2 days ago. Single story, approximately 1,200 square feet, 2 bedrooms, security cameras on all 4 corners, 1 vehicle, Martin Keller's truck, 1 occupant visible, but there could be others inside. The cabin sits on 10 acres, no neighbors, accessed by a single dirt road. Chen turned to her sharply. You conducted unauthorized surveillance of a potential crime scene? Mrs. Hayes, that could jeopardize this entire case. I gathered information, Diane said coldly. Information that you people should have found 16 years ago if you'd done your jobs. My daughter has been tortured for over half her life because everyone missed what was right in front of them. So don't lecture me about proper procedure when procedure failed Emma from the beginning. The room fell silent. Morrison broke it. She's right. We failed. The system failed. Now we fix it. Agent Chen, what do we need to move on that cabin today? Chen considered for a moment, then nodded sharply. We need the warrant fast-tracked through a federal judge. I need a tactical team. FBI hostage rescue team is based in Detroit, but we can have them here in 3 hours. Local SWAT is backup. We need thermal imaging to confirm how many occupants are inside, and we need a plan that prioritizes Emma's safety above all else. I'm coming, Diane said. It wasn't a request. Absolutely not, Chen responded immediately. Civilians don't participate in tactical operations. You've provided invaluable information, but your role ends here. That's my daughter in there. I've spent 16 years searching for her. You're not leaving me behind now. Morrison intervened. Diane, I understand. God knows I understand. But Agent Chen is right. You can't be part of the breach team. However, he raised a hand to stop her protest. You can be on scene in a command vehicle, monitoring the operation. When we bring Emma out, you'll be the first person she sees. That's the best I can offer. Diane wanted to argue, but she saw the logic. She'd come this far. She couldn't sabotage the rescue by being reckless now. Fine, but I'm there. As close as you'll let me be. The next 3 hours were a blur of coordinated chaos. Federal Judge Martha Hawkins, working from her home office in Grand Rapids, reviewed the evidence and issued warrants for the cabin search and the arrests of Richard Thornton, Martin Keller, and Carol Brennan. The FBI hostage rescue team loaded into helicopters in Detroit. Morrison coordinated with local law enforcement to set up roadblocks and secure the perimeter around the cabin. Meanwhile, agents moved to simultaneously arrest Richard Thornton in Arizona and Carol Brennan in Traverse City. Both arrests needed to happen at exactly the same moment as the cabin raid. If either suspect was alerted, they might warn Martin Keller, endangering Emma. At 4:47 p.m. on February 17, 2019, a convoy of law enforcement vehicles drove toward Lewiston. The sun was already setting, casting long shadows through the winter forest. Diane sat in an FBI command vehicle, watching monitors showing feeds from drones circling the cabin. Thermal imaging confirmed 2 heat signatures inside, one in what appeared to be a bedroom, one in the main living area. 2 people. One had to be Emma. The other presumably was Martin Keller. Agent Chen, wearing tactical gear and a bulletproof vest, approached the command vehicle. Mrs. Hayes, we're moving into position. The team will breach in approximately 15 minutes. I need you to understand, we don't know what condition Emma is in, physically or psychologically. She's been in captivity for 16 years since she was 9 years old. She may not remember you. She may have Stockholm Syndrome. She may be traumatized beyond what we can predict. You need to prepare yourself. Diane's jaw tightened. I've been preparing for 16 years. Just bring her out. The hostage rescue team moved through the woods with silent precision, approaching the cabin from multiple angles. Snipers took positions with clear views of the windows and doors. Agents confirmed that the security cameras were functioning. Keller would see them coming the moment they left the tree line. At 5:03 p.m., Agent Chen made the call. All units execute, execute, execute. The team moved with explosive speed. A battering ram took down the front door. Flashbang grenades detonated inside, disorienting anyone within. Agents poured through the entrance, Weapons raised, voices shouting commands. FBI, hands up, get on the ground, FBI. In the command vehicle, Diane watched the monitors, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Radio chatter crackled through speakers. Front room clear. Kitchen clear. One male subject detained. Living room. Bedroom 1, locked door. Breach it now. Another crash, wood splintering. Then silence that stretched for an eternity. Probably only seconds, but feeling like years. Then a voice choked with emotion. We have her. We have Emma Hayes. Subject is alive, conscious, responsive, requesting medical immediately. Diane's legs gave out. She collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down her face, hands covering her mouth to muffle the sobs that tore from her throat. Alive. Emma was alive. After 16 years of hell, of not knowing, of fearing the worst, Emma was alive. I need to see her, Diane gasped. Please, I need to see my daughter. Medical needs to assess her first, Chen said gently, her own eyes suspiciously bright. But yes, Mrs. Hayes, you're going to see your daughter. Inside the cabin, paramedics worked quickly. Emma Hayes, now 25 years old, though she looked younger, malnourished and pale, sat on a bed wrapped in a blanket, staring at the sudden influx of strangers with wide, frightened eyes. She hadn't spoken yet, just watched everything with the wary stillness of someone who'd learned that survival meant being invisible. Martin Keller had been taken into custody without resistance. He sat in the back of a police car, face blank, saying nothing. He'd been caught so completely, so suddenly, that he hadn't even attempted to destroy evidence or claim innocence. One of the agents, a woman named Rebecca Torres who specialized in working with trauma victims, knelt in front of Emma, speaking softly. Emma, my name is Rebecca. You're safe now. We're from the FBI. We're here to help you. Can you understand me? Emma nodded slowly, her eyes darting around the room as if expecting this to be a trick, expecting the nightmare to reassert itself. You're going to a hospital where doctors will make sure you're okay. And Emma, your mother is here. Diane Hayes. She's been looking for you every single day for 16 years. She never gave up. She's the reason we found you. Would you like to see her? For the first time, Emma's blank expression cracked. Her eyes filled with tears. Mom? Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, as if she'd forgotten how to use it properly. My mom is here? She's right outside. She's been waiting for you. Emma stood on shaking legs, the blanket clutched around her shoulders. Agents escorted her out of the cabin, through the front door she hadn't been allowed to pass through in 16 years, into the cold February air that smelled of pine and freedom. Diane saw her daughter emerge from the cabin and felt time collapse. The 9-year-old girl with wild auburn curls had become a young woman, thin and pale and broken, but unmistakably, impossibly, Emma. Those green eyes, the same shade as Diane's, met hers across the distance. Emma! Diane ran, propriety and protocol forgotten, just a mother reaching for her lost child. Emma's face crumpled. Mom! Mom! Her voice grew stronger, more certain. Mom! They collided in an embrace, 16 years in the making. Both were sobbing, clutching each other with desperate strength, afraid that if they let go, this moment would evaporate like so many dreams before. Diane's hands cradled Emma's face, touching her as if to confirm she was real, solid, actually here. I love you, Diane gasped between sobs. I love you more than all the stars. I never stopped looking. I never gave up. I promised I'd find you. I promised. I knew you would, Emma whispered, her voice breaking. I knew you'd come. I never stopped believing. Even when he said you'd forgotten me, I knew you wouldn't. I knew. Around them, hardened law enforcement officers wiped their eyes and looked away, giving mother and daughter this moment of reunion that transcended the horror of how they'd gotten here. Agent Chen approached carefully. Mrs. Hayes, Emma needs to go to the hospital. She needs medical evaluation, counseling, debriefing. This is going to be a long process. I'm not leaving her, Diane said fiercely, one arm still wrapped protectively around Emma. Whatever happens next, wherever she goes, I'm going with her. I wouldn't dream of separating you, Chen said softly. You'll ride in the ambulance together, but Emma, I need you to understand there will be questions. Many questions. About what happened, about who was involved, about everything you remember. Can you help us? Emma, still pressed against her mother's side, nodded. I'll tell you everything. Every person who came to that cabin, every face I saw, every name I heard. I remember it all. I want them to pay for what they did. Her voice, though weak from disuse, carried a thread of steel. Emma Hayes had survived 16 years of captivity. She was broken, but not destroyed, traumatized, but not defeated. As the ambulance drove toward Munson Medical Center, Diane held Emma's hand, memorizing her face, unable to stop touching her, confirming again and again that this was real. Emma stared at her mother with equal intensity, as if afraid to blink in case the dream ended. "I'm 25 now," Emma said quietly. "I missed everything, my whole life." "No," Diane said firmly. "They took 16 years from you, but you're 25, Emma. You have your whole life ahead of you. We'll face it together. Whatever you need, however long it takes. I'm not going anywhere. Never again." In separate locations, Richard Thornton was being arrested at his Arizona home, and Carol Brennan was being taken into custody at her office in Traverse City. Both would face federal charges of kidnapping, conspiracy, and child exploitation. Martin Keller was already in custody, refusing to speak without an attorney. But the investigation was far from over. Grace Mills had mentioned a group, 6 or 7 men total. That meant there were more people involved, more conspirators who'd enabled Emma's captivity, more monsters hiding in plain sight. Captain Morrison, watching from the command vehicle as the ambulance drove away, made a silent vow. This case had haunted him for 16 years. Now finally he had a chance to make it right. Not just for Emma, but for every child these predators might have harmed. He picked up his phone and called the FBI field office. "This is Captain Frank Morrison. I need a task force assembled immediately. We have a conspiracy to unravel, and I want every single person involved in custody within the week. No one walks away from this. No one." The rescue of Emma Hayes was just the beginning. The real work, bringing down an entire network of predators and their enablers, was only starting. But for the first time in 16 years, Diane Hayes felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. Her daughter was alive, her daughter was free, and nothing would ever separate them again. The interrogation rooms at the FBI field office in Detroit were cold, sterile, and deliberately uncomfortable. Over the next 72 hours, 3 separate interrogations would reveal the depths of a conspiracy that had operated in plain sight for over 2 decades. Martin Keller was the first to break. At 67 years old, facing multiple life sentences without possibility of parole, he had nothing left to lose and no loyalty worth preserving. His attorney, a public defender named Harold Weiss, who'd drawn the short straw on this assignment, advised him that cooperation was his only path to avoiding the death penalty. Agent Victoria Chen sat across from Keller in interview room 3, a file folder thick with evidence spread before her. Captain Morrison watched through one-way glass, his hands clenched into fists, forcing himself to remain professional when every instinct screamed to break through that glass and make Keller pay for what he'd done. "Let's start with the basics," Chen said, her voice neutral and businesslike. "How long have you known Richard Thornton?" Keller's voice was flat, emotionless. "He's my half-brother. Same mother, different fathers. We grew up together in Detroit. I was always the screw-up, the one who couldn't hold a job or a relationship. Richard was the golden child. Became a dentist, married well, respected in the community. When did you become involved in his criminal activities?" 1997. I was broke, living in a trailer, drinking too much. Richard offered me money to help him with what he called a project. At first it was just maintaining properties, doing odd jobs. He owned several rental houses around Michigan. I didn't ask questions because I needed the money. "When did you learn what the properties were really being used for?" Keller was silent for a long moment. 1999. Richard brought me to a house in Flint, said he needed me to watch someone for a weekend while he was out of town. That's when I met the first girl. She was maybe 12, kept in a locked bedroom. Richard told me she was there voluntarily, that her parents were abusive and he was protecting her. I was stupid enough or drunk enough to believe him, or maybe I just wanted to believe him because the money was good. Chen's expression remained neutral, though Morrison could see the tension in her shoulders. How many children were there over the years? Before Emma, 3 that I knew about. Never for long. Weeks, maybe a couple months at most. Richard would move them around, different properties, different people watching them. I didn't understand the full scope of it then. I thought it was just him. When did you realize it wasn't just him? 2002. That's when I met the others. Peter Mills, Carol Brennan, and 4 other men whose names I only knew as initials. They used code names. They called themselves the Preservation Society. They had meetings every few months, usually at the cabin in Lewiston. They'd share photographs, videos, discuss new acquisitions. That's when I understood what I'd gotten involved in. But by then, I was in too deep. They had evidence of my involvement. I couldn't leave without destroying myself. Tell me about Emma Hayes. Why her specifically? Keller's face twitched. Richard became obsessed with her in 2002. He'd done dental work on her twice. Said she had the perfect combination of innocence and spirit. He started showing up at places where she'd be. School events, soccer games. He studied her routine, her family situation. When he learned about the camping trip, he saw an opportunity. Walk me through September 12, 2003. What happened that night? Keller took a shaky breath. The plan was weeks in the making. Carol Brennan manipulated the volunteer roster to ensure Richard would be selected. She also made sure Patricia Patterson was assigned as the lead counselor. Patricia had worked with their youth programs before and trusted them. Derek Mills, Peter's son, was working at the campground for the summer. His job was to drug the coffee served to the adult volunteers and counselors that evening. Not enough to knock them out, just enough to make them sleep deeply. And Patricia Patterson? Was she involved? No, she was a useful idiot. They knew she'd be conscientious but not suspicious. Around 2 a.m., Richard entered cabin 7. He'd been watching, waiting for the right moment. He carried Emma out while she was sleeping. She didn't even wake up. He'd given her a sedative earlier, mixed into her hot chocolate at the campfire. She was completely unconscious. Morrison's jaw clenched. The image of Richard Thornton carrying his sleeping daughter from that cabin while everyone else slept, drugged and unaware, made him want to put his fist through the wall. Richard drove her directly to the Lewiston cabin. I was already there, had been preparing the room for weeks. Reinforced locks, soundproofing, supplies, everything needed to keep someone long-term. The cabin was registered under the shell company, so it couldn't be traced back to any individual. We thought we'd covered every angle. Did Emma wake up during the drive? Not until the next morning. By then, she was locked in the bedroom, miles from anywhere she knew. Richard told her that her mother didn't want her anymore, that everyone had stopped looking, that she'd been forgotten. He told her if she tried to escape or tell anyone, he'd hurt her family. He showed her photographs of Diane at home, at work, at the grocery store. He made Emma believe he was watching everyone she loved. That cooperation was the only way to keep them safe. Chen paused, letting the horror of this settle. You kept her there for 16 years. You watched a child grow up in captivity. How did you justify that to yourself? Keller's expression remained blank. I stopped trying to justify it after the first year. I just did what Richard paid me to do. He visited every month, sometimes more. Others came too, though I never knew all their names. My job was to keep Emma alive, keep her controlled, keep her hidden. That's what I did. Did Emma ever try to escape? Twice in the first year. After that, she stopped trying. She understood there was nowhere to go, no one to help her. The cabin is 10 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by forest. In winter, she would have frozen before reaching anyone. She learned compliance was survival. Morrison had heard enough. He left the observation room and found a bathroom where he could splash cold water on his face and wrestle his rage back under control. 16 years. Emma had spent 16 years in that cabin, believing her mother had abandoned her, believing escape was impossible. The interrogation of Carol Brennan painted an even more disturbing picture. Carol, 59 years old, sat in interview room 1 with her attorney, an expensive criminal defense lawyer named Marcus Rothstein from Detroit. Unlike Keller, Carol initially refused to say anything beyond confirming her name and asserting her Fifth Amendment rights. It took Agent Chen 3 hours and a carefully orchestrated revelation to break her silence. Ms. Brennan, I want to show you something, Chen said, placing a photograph on the table. It showed Emma Hayes being loaded into an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket, Diane Hayes holding her hand. This was taken yesterday. Emma Hayes is alive, free, and talking to us. She's told us everything she remembers about the people who visited the cabin over the years. She's described them in detail. Their faces, their voices, their mannerisms. We're going to identify every single person involved in this conspiracy. Carol stared at the photograph, her face draining of color. Right now you're facing kidnapping, conspiracy, and obstruction charges. But if you cooperate, if you help us identify the others, the prosecutor might be willing to discuss reducing charges. If you stay silent, you'll take the fall for everyone. Is that really how you want this to end? Carol looked at her attorney, who whispered something in her ear. Then she turned back to Chen, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you want to know? Everything. Start from the beginning. How did you get involved? Carol's hands trembled as she spoke. I met Richard Thornton in 1998 through a community volunteer program. He seemed kind, charismatic, genuinely interested in helping children. We worked together on several youth initiatives. In 1999, he confided in me about his problems. That's what he called them. His attraction to children. He said he was fighting it, that he needed help staying accountable. But that's not what happened. No. Instead of getting help, he drew me into his world. He showed me that there were others like him, that they supported each other. He made it sound almost noble, like they were fighting a society that didn't understand them. I was lonely, isolated, desperate for connection. I convinced myself that what he was telling me made sense. When did you actively participate in criminal activity? 2000. Richard needed someone with access to county records. I worked at the clerk's office. I could make documents disappear, alter records, create false paperwork for property transfers. At first, it was small things. Then it escalated. When they started planning Emma's abduction, I helped create the shell company, manipulated the volunteer roster, ensured that any investigation would hit dead ends when they tried to trace property ownership. Who else was involved? Give me names. Carol hesitated and Rothstein placed a hand on her arm. My client will provide names in exchange for a formal agreement with the prosecutor. Chen nodded. I'll arrange that. But I need something now. Something that shows good faith. Give me one name. Someone we don't already have. Carol was quiet for a long moment, then, David Mercer. He's a Michigan State Police detective. He was part of the group. When Emma disappeared, he made sure the investigation stayed focused on external suspects, that it never looked too closely at the people who were actually at the campground. The room fell silent. A state police detective, someone who'd actively sabotaged the investigation from the inside, ensuring that Emma would never be found. Morrison, watching this revelation, felt his world tilt. He'd worked alongside Michigan State Police throughout the investigation. He'd trusted their expertise, their resources, their commitment to finding Emma. And one of them had been a predator, deliberately leading everyone away from the truth. By the end of the week, 6 more arrests had been made. David Mercer, the state police detective, was taken into custody at his home in Lansing. He'd been with the department for 23 years, had a wife and 2 teenage daughters, was respected by his colleagues. His arrest sent shockwaves through law enforcement communities across Michigan. 3 other men, a high school teacher, a youth pastor, and a pediatrician, were arrested based on information provided by Carol Brennan and corroborated by evidence found at the Lewiston cabin. Each had visited Emma over the years. Each had been part of the network that enabled her captivity. The final 2 members of the Preservation Society had died before they could face justice. Peter Mills in 2010, and a man named Robert Carlson who'd been killed in a car accident in 2015. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. These weren't strangers or outsiders. They were pillars of the community, professionals with families, reputations, respected positions. They'd hidden behind their status, their respectability, their positions of trust and authority, and they'd done it successfully for over 2 decades. At Munson Medical Center, Emma Hayes was undergoing extensive medical and psychological evaluation. Physically, she was malnourished and vitamin D deficient from years of limited sunlight, but otherwise surprisingly healthy. Psychologically, the damage was profound, but not irreparable. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a trauma specialist, worked with Emma for hours each day. She's incredibly resilient, Dr. Mitchell told Diane during one of their consultations. What she endured would have broken most people, but Emma found ways to survive mentally and emotionally. She read books. Keller allowed her access to books. She kept a journal, though Richard would periodically confiscate and destroy them. She created an internal world that they couldn't touch. That's what saved her sanity. Diane spent every possible moment with Emma, slowly rebuilding the relationship that had been violently severed 16 years earlier. They talked about everything: the years lost, the life Emma had missed, the future they could build together. Emma was simultaneously the 9-year-old girl Diane had lost, and a 25-year-old woman Diane was meeting for the first time. "I thought you'd forgotten me," Emma confessed one evening, lying in her hospital bed while Diane sat beside her. "Richard told me you'd moved on, had other children, that you were happier without me. I wanted to believe he was lying, but after so many years, doubt crept in. I never had another child," Diane said, her voice fierce. "I never moved on. I never stopped looking. Every single day for 16 years, finding you was the only thing that mattered. You were never forgotten, Emma. Never for one single second." Emma's eyes filled with tears. All that time you were searching. While I was locked in that room, you were out there fighting for me. And I found you. We found each other. The media coverage was overwhelming. Emma Hayes' rescue became international news. The story of a mother who never gave up, who spent 16 years searching while everyone else accepted tragedy, captured hearts worldwide. But the media attention also brought scrutiny, questions, and demands for accountability. How had this conspiracy operated for so long? How had so many people been involved without detection? Why had the initial investigation failed so completely? Congressional hearings were scheduled. The FBI launched an internal review of missing persons protocols. The Michigan State Police Department faced intense criticism for David Mercer's involvement and began investigating how many other cases he might have compromised during his 23-year career. Captain Morrison submitted a detailed report documenting every failure, every missed opportunity, every moment when the system had let Emma Hayes down. He didn't excuse his own role in those failures. He'd been part of the investigation that hadn't looked closely enough at the people who were right there in the camp. "We failed her," he told a press conference in late February. "We failed to see what was happening right in front of us because we couldn't imagine that people we trusted, a dentist, a county clerk, a police detective, could be capable of such evil. We looked for monsters in the shadows and missed the monsters in plain sight. That's on us. That's on me. And we have to do better." In early March, Emma was finally released from the hospital. She moved into Diane's house, the same house she'd left from that September morning in 2003. Her childhood bedroom had been preserved exactly as she'd left it, a shrine Diane had never been able to dismantle. Emma stood in the doorway of that room, staring at the purple walls, the posters of bands she'd liked as a 9-year-old, the stuffed animals arranged on her bed. It was like looking at an archaeological site from another lifetime. "I'm not her anymore," Emma said quietly. "That little girl who lived in this room, she's gone." "I know," Diane replied. "But maybe we can figure out who you are now, together." The road ahead would be long and difficult. Emma had years of trauma to process, a life to rebuild from scratch, a future to navigate in a world that had moved on without her. But she was free, she was home, and she had her mother beside her. The trials began in September 2019, exactly 16 years after Emma Hayes disappeared. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Caldwell, had built an ironclad case. The evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from Emma herself, forensic analysis of the cabin, financial records, communications between conspirators, and confessions from multiple defendants seeking plea deals. Richard Thornton refused to plead guilty. His attorney, a high-priced defense lawyer named Gregory Ashford from Chicago, attempted to argue that his client had been framed, that the evidence was circumstantial, that Emma's testimony was unreliable due to trauma and the passage of time. It was a desperate strategy and everyone in the courtroom knew it. The trial took place in federal court in Grand Rapids. Security was extraordinary. Death threats had been made against all the defendants, and public rage demanded they be protected long enough to face justice through the legal system. Diane sat in the gallery every single day, Emma beside her. It was Emma's choice to attend. Dr. Mitchell had counseled her about the potential psychological impact of facing her abusers in court. But Emma was adamant. "I need to look them in the eye," she told her mother. "I need them to see that they didn't break me, that I survived them." On the third day of Richard Thornton's trial, Emma took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as she walked to the witness box, raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. She wore a simple blue dress, her auburn hair pulled back, her face composed. She looked directly at Thornton, who sat at the defense table refusing to meet her gaze. Caldwell approached gently. "Ms. Hayes, can you tell the court your name and age?" "My name is Emma Catherine Hayes. I'm 25 years old. Do you see the man who abducted you in this courtroom today?" "Yes, Richard Thornton. He's sitting at that table wearing the gray suit." Emma's voice was steady, clear, unwavering. "Can you tell the court about the night of September 12, 2003? What do you remember?" Emma took a breath. "I remember going to sleep in my cabin during the camping trip. I'd had hot chocolate at the campfire earlier. It tasted a little strange, but I didn't think much of it. I remember feeling very sleepy, much more than usual. I crawled into my sleeping bag, and that's the last thing I remember until I woke up." "Where did you wake up?" "In a locked room in a cabin I'd never seen before. It was morning, but I didn't know what day it was. I was scared. I called for help, screamed until my throat was raw. Nobody came except Richard Thornton. He told me that my mother didn't want me anymore, that everyone had given up looking, that I belonged to him now. Ashford objected. Hearsay, Your Honor, but Judge Patricia Monroe overruled. The defendant's statements to the victim are admissible. Continue, Ms. Hayes. Emma's testimony lasted 4 hours. She described 16 years of captivity in meticulous detail. The locked room, the rules she was forced to follow, the visits from Thornton and others whose faces she'd memorized. She described how Thornton had shown her photographs of Diane, telling her that her mother had moved on, forgotten her, replaced her. He wanted me to believe I was alone in the world, Emma said, that he was all I had, but I never believed it. Not completely. I held on to the hope that somewhere my mother was still looking for me. That hope is what kept me alive. When Caldwell finished, Ashford approached for cross-examination. His strategy was to discredit Emma's memory, suggest that 16 years of captivity had distorted her recollections, imply that she couldn't reliably identify people or recall specific events. Ms. Hayes, you were 9 years old when this allegedly began. Can you really be certain of what happened so long ago? Emma looked at him with the kind of clarity that comes from surviving the unsurvivable. I remember every single day I spent in that cabin. I remember every face, every voice, every moment. When you're living a nightmare, you don't forget the details. You can't forget them because they're all you have, so yes, Mr. Ashford, I'm certain. Ashford tried several more approaches, each one deflected by Emma's calm, consistent testimony. Finally, he made a mistake born of desperation. Ms. Hayes, isn't it true that you've been coached by the prosecution? That your mother has influenced your testimony? Emma's composure cracked slightly, anger flashing in her green eyes. My mother saved me. She spent 16 years searching when everyone else gave up. She never stopped believing I was alive. The only coaching I needed was from my abusers, who spent 16 years trying to convince me I was worthless, forgotten, and alone. They failed. I survived. And now I'm here to make sure they pay for what they did. The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Monroe gavelled for order, but even she seemed moved by Emma's words. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Richard Thornton was found guilty on all counts: kidnapping, conspiracy, child exploitation, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole, plus an additional 500 years to run consecutively. The judge's statement at sentencing was scathing. Mr. Thornton, you used your position of trust and respect in the community to perpetrate one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. You stole a child from her family, robbed her of 16 years of life, and traumatized an entire community. You will spend the rest of your natural life in prison, and that is far less than you deserve. Martin Keller, having cooperated with authorities, received a slightly reduced sentence: life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. At his age, it was effectively a life sentence anyway. Carol Brennan, in exchange for her testimony against the others, was sentenced to 40 years with possibility of parole after 25. She would be 84 years old if she ever saw freedom again. David Mercer, the corrupt state police detective, received one of the harshest sentences: life without parole, plus additional consecutive sentences for each count of obstruction, evidence tampering, and abuse of authority. His arrest had triggered a massive review of every case he'd touched during his career, resulting in 3 wrongful conviction reversals and dozens of case re-examinations. The youth pastor, the pediatrician, and the high school teacher all received life sentences. By December 2019, every living member of the Preservation Society was behind bars, facing the consequences of decades of predation. But justice in court was only one part of Emma's journey toward healing. Throughout late 2019 and into 2020, Emma worked intensively with Dr. Mitchell and other trauma specialists. The path was neither linear nor easy. She experienced nightmares, panic attacks, periods of depression, when the weight of what had been stolen from her felt unbearable. There were days when she couldn't leave the house, days when even Diane's presence felt suffocating, days when she wondered if she'd ever feel normal again. What is normal? She asked Dr. Mitchell during one particularly difficult session in January 2020. I don't know how to be a 25-year-old woman. I missed everything. High school, college, first job, first love, first everything. How do I catch up to a life I never got to live? You don't catch up, Dr. Mitchell said gently. You start from where you are. Your path is different from everyone else's, Emma, but that doesn't make it less valid. You're not behind. You're exactly where you are, and that's okay. Slowly, painfully, Emma began building a life, She enrolled in online courses to earn her GED, studying subjects she'd missed during the years of captivity. Diane helped her navigate technology that hadn't existed when she was 9. Smartphones, social media, streaming services. The world had changed dramatically between 2003 and 2019, and Emma had to learn it all from scratch. She also began carefully, tentatively, reaching out to people from her past. Madison, Sophie, Ashley, Claire, and Jasmine, the girls who'd been in Cabin 7 that night, had all grown into women with lives of their own. They'd carried guilt for 16 years, wondering if they could have done something, noticed something, saved Emma somehow. In March 2020, they reunited at Diane's house. It was awkward at first. These women barely knew each other anymore, connected only by shared trauma and the ghost of a 9-year-old girl who'd vanished from their midst. But as they talked, shared memories, and grieved together for the childhood innocence they'd all lost that night, something healing began. "We thought you were dead," Madison said, tears streaming down her face. "We attended your memorial service. We've lived 16 years thinking you were gone. Seeing you alive, seeing you here, it's like a miracle. I thought you'd all forgotten me," Emma replied. "I thought I'd become just a sad story you'd tell occasionally. I didn't know you carried this with you too." They met regularly after that, forming a support group of sorts. These women understood Emma's experience in ways others couldn't. They'd been there that night. They'd lived with the aftermath. They were uniquely positioned to walk alongside Emma as she rebuilt her life. Patricia Patterson reached out through a letter in April 2020. She'd retired from teaching after Emma's disappearance, had spent years in therapy dealing with guilt and trauma, and had never stopped wondering what she could have done differently. "I don't expect forgiveness," she wrote. "I was the adult responsible for your safety and I failed you. I've lived with that knowledge every day for 17 years, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry." Emma read the letter multiple times before deciding to respond. She met Patricia at a park in May 2020. Social distancing maintained due to the COVID-19 pandemic that had swept the world during Emma's recovery. Patricia looked elderly, broken, diminished by guilt. Emma looked at her and felt an unexpected surge of compassion. "It wasn't your fault," Emma said. "They drugged you, they manipulated everything. You were as much a victim of their conspiracy as I was, just in a different way. But I should have known, I should have seen. They spent years planning this. They were experts at hiding. How could you have seen what they worked so hard to conceal?" Emma's voice was firm. "I don't blame you, Ms. Patterson. I blame the people who took me. Please stop punishing yourself for their crimes." It was a moment of grace that freed them both. Emma from residual anger she didn't realize she carried. Patricia from guilt that had been crushing her for nearly 2 decades. By summer 2020, Emma had made a decision that surprised everyone. She wanted to become an advocate for missing children. She reached out to organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, offered to share her story, to help other families navigate the nightmare of having a child disappear. "I can't get back the 16 years they took," Emma told Diane, "but I can make sure other families don't suffer the way we did. I can help change the systems that failed us. I can turn this nightmare into something meaningful." Diane was both proud and terrified. She wanted to protect Emma, wrap her in safety, shield her from anything that might cause more pain. But she also recognized that Emma needed autonomy, needed to reclaim her life on her own terms. In October 2020, Emma gave her first public speech at a conference on missing and exploited children. Standing before hundreds of law enforcement officials, social workers, and advocates, she told her story with the same clear-eyed courage she'd shown in the courtroom. "I'm Emma Hayes. I was abducted at age 9 and held captive for 16 years by people my community trusted. I'm here to tell you that predators don't always look like predators. They look like dentists and teachers and police officers. They hide behind respectability and authority, and they count on you not looking too closely at people who seem trustworthy." She outlined specific recommendations for improving missing persons investigations, better interagency communication, mandatory background checks for all adults in youth-facing positions, increased scrutiny of people close to the victim rather than focusing primarily on external threats. "My mother never gave up on me," Emma continued, her voice strong. "While the official investigation went cold, she kept searching. She spent 16 years of her life and all of her resources refusing to accept that I was gone. That persistence saved my life. We need systems that match that level of dedication, that never give up, never assume the worst, never stop fighting for missing children." The speech went viral. Emma became a face and voice for missing children advocacy, appearing on news programs, podcasts, and documentaries. She was careful to maintain boundaries. Therapy continued, Dr. Mitchell helped her process the emotional toll of constantly revisiting her trauma, and Diane remained her anchor through all of it. In March 2021, Congress passed the Emma Hayes Act, legislation that mandated new protocols for missing children investigations and established a federal grant program to support families of missing children. Emma attended the signing ceremony at the White House, standing beside legislators who'd been moved by her story to enact meaningful change. "This law won't bring back the years I lost," Emma said in remarks at the ceremony, "but it might prevent other children from losing their years. It might save other families from the agony mine endured. And that makes every difficult moment of sharing my story worthwhile." By 2022, 3 years after her rescue, Emma had built a life she could recognize as her own. She'd earned her GED and enrolled in community college, studying social work with the goal of working directly with trauma survivors. She'd moved into her own apartment, a huge step toward independence, though she video called Diane every night. She'd even begun tentatively dating, though navigating relationships after everything she'd experienced was complicated. Dr. Mitchell helped her work through questions about trust, intimacy, and what healthy relationships looked like. "I'm not broken," Emma told her mother during a visit in fall 2022. "They tried to break me, but I survived. I'm building something new from the pieces they tried to destroy. And Mom," her voice caught with emotion, "I'm actually happy. For the first time since I was 9 years old, I'm genuinely happy." Diane, looking at her daughter, strong, resilient, finding joy despite everything, felt her heart overflow. The little girl she'd lost was gone, stolen by monsters. But the woman Emma had become was extraordinary, not because of what had happened to her, but because of how she'd chosen to move forward from it. Captain Frank Morrison retired from law enforcement in 2023, but not before establishing the Emma Hayes Cold Case Task Force, a dedicated unit that reviewed unsolved missing persons cases using the lessons learned from Emma's case. In its first year, the task force solved 3 cold cases and brought closure to families who'd waited decades for answers. On September 12, 2023, 20 years after Emma's abduction, she returned to Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore, not to the campground where she'd been taken. That site had been closed after the scandal, but to the shores of Lake Michigan where she'd roasted marshmallows on her last night of freedom. Diane stood beside her, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of orange and crimson. "I used to have nightmares about this place," Emma said quietly, "but I didn't want them to take this from me too. These dunes, this lake, they were beautiful before they became part of my nightmare. I want to reclaim that beauty." "Are you reclaiming it?" Diane asked. Emma watched the sun sink below the horizon, felt the autumn wind on her face, breathed in the scent of pine and lake water. She thought about everything she'd survived, everything she'd built, everything she'd become despite efforts to destroy her. "Yes," she said finally, a smile crossing her face. "I think I am." The case of Emma Hayes closed with justice served, trauma acknowledged, and healing begun. It exposed how predators hide in plain sight, how systems fail vulnerable children, and how persistence and love can overcome even the darkest evil. But more than anything, it proved that hope is not naive, not that a mother's refusal to give up can change everything, that survival is possible even after the unsurvivable, and that sometimes, against all odds, lost children come home.